For any of you that have been following this channel since its beginning, from just over a year ago, you will know that I'm a huge fan of Susan Hill's The Women in Black. I love the original novella. I love the 1980s made-for-television Nigel Neal adaptation. I love the play that was adapted from it quite famously as well. And I've been really looking forward to seeing the new adaptation, the new film version of The Women in Black, which has just been released here in Britain. It's directed by James Watkins. It stars Daniel Radcliffe and Kieran Hines, and it's written by Jane Goldman, who many people will know as Jonathan Ross's wife, who's a popular television presenter in this country. But really, I mean, if you look at the film she's getting involved in, X-Men First Class, Stardust, etc., she is actually really carving out quite a successful career as a screenwriter herself. The film is also the return, or one in a number of movies, which marks the return of Hammer Horror, probably my favourite horror studio in film history. So there's a lot to really look forward to in this. Where do I begin? I'll try and keep this as spoiler free as possible. First of all, I had a great set, and I went with my friends. My girlfriend came along as well, who hates horror films, but she's read the book, so she wanted to see this. Although I think she watched about 10% of it through her fingers. And there was a good crowd there, and it was a packed cinema, and people were screaming left, right, and centre, and just a really great Friday night atmosphere in the cinema. So that, I think, added to my impression of the film. I probably have a different impression of the film when I see it. Possibly on DVD. I might even go back to see it again in the cinema. So let's start off with what the film is about if you don't know. It follows a character called Arthur Kipps. It's set in the late 19th century, or early, in fact not late 19th century, it's set in the early 20th century. And it's about a solicitor called Arthur Kipps, or a man who works for solicitors or lawyers, who is sent to a small coastal town in England, which is quite remote, to settle the estate of a Mrs. Drablow who has passed away. She lived in this house called Eelmarsh House, if you can get it right. And this house was on a small piece of land just off of the coast, connected by a causeway, which is a small road. And for anyone that's been on a causeway before, you'll know that at certain times the tide comes in and it covers the road, so that you are isolated on that little island for a certain amount of time until the tide goes out. So this is the setting of the film. Arthur Kipps goes to this small town. When he's there, he realises that a lot of people don't want him settling the affairs of Miss Drablow, and he thinks it's perhaps a lot of superstition. I apologise for this farty chair again. Listen to that. Just in case you thought it was me. So the residents don't really want Mr. Kipps from having any sort of influence or go on any sort of exploration of the Drablow's house and what it means, and the sort of backstory to the house. While he's there, he starts to see a woman dressed in black, and all sorts of crazy, scary goings on occur. And he realises that every time someone sees the woman in black, a child dies in the town. So he then tries to figure out who the woman in black is, what relation she has to Eelmarsh House, and why these children are dying. That's the story, in a nutshell, or not really, a cracked nutshell probably. So first of all, it keeps a lot from, it keeps the core from the book, the whole idea of what the Women in Black is, but it does remove a lot from the story. And I will go into that at the end of this video, and I will say spoilers so that anyone that hasn't either watched the film or read the book and wants to can switch off. There's a lot to really admire about the film. most admirable thing about the film is the way that it's shot. Certainly, the production design is excellent. It's very, very good. It's very striking. It's got a very rich palette, which is unusual sometimes for a horror film. But in certain places, it becomes very drab, obviously deliberately. They do a great job of capturing the sort of early 20th century, that sort of feel. They do a great job of capturing that without you really being drawn to the fact too much that it's a period piece. Some period pieces are too in your face with "look at us, we're in another time frame," but it does it in a really skillful way. The performances are good, and Daniel Radcliffe is too young, I think, to play the lead. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but he does a good job. A lot of people that I was in the cinema, they criticised Daniel Radcliffe, but I thought he did a really good job and showed that he can really act. It's just that perhaps he was cast a little bit too young, but then maybe not. You see, the thing is, his character, and this is one of the complaints I have of the film. In the book, it's the character telling the story. So, but in the film, they've added a backstory to the character. They've added this backstory which shows that he's had a loss, that his wife has died, and that he's left with a son to raise. And that whole idea, that whole concept of giving the central character in a horror film, especially a ghost story, a history of tragedy in their life, and somehow connecting that to the supernatural manifestation, it's well done in some films. In other films, it feels tagged on, and I think it was unnecessary here. I really do. I don't think there's any need to make the central character have this backstory. Sometimes it's great, many times it's great in a ghost story to have a central character that goes into it blind. Someone who is untarnished by the world, someone who perhaps is a skeptic as well, and they go into this situation and their whole worldview is turned on its head, and that's part of the journey of that character. We don't so much get that here, and there are a few scenes that allude towards the idea, concept of spiritualism, which became very popular in the Victorian era. And there's a small conversation about this in the middle of the film, and about Daniel Radcliffe's characters want to somehow look or connect to his wife, but it feels very out of place. In fact, there are moments in the film that do feel like that, which leads me to believe again that the film has been tampered with. There perhaps are other threads that were explored that have been left on the cutting room floor, and I think that's probably one of them. The reason that I say that it's not that it's kind of unneeded is that it doesn't really change the story in any way, except the ending, which because of this they have changed the ending of the book. Again, the ending felt a little bit too tacked on, but let's really get to the crux of the matter, which is, as a horror film, is it scary? Yeah, it is scary. Unfortunately, it starts off like a slow burn classic British ghost story, which I love. The Innocents, The Haunting, films of that kind. And then it turns into a jump fest, much like modern sort of ghost stories, and often American ghost stories like Insidious. And that didn't sit with me well, even though some of the jump scares are really well done and did get me. I don't feel that the Woman in Black, the story of the Woman in Black, needed that so much. I think sometimes jump scares can be really effective if you have it in one or two places. You don't have it throughout the entire film. You just do it here and there. But there's an entire sort of like 10-minute section of the film, about 2/3 of the way in, which, as far as jump scares go, it's like an assault on this man. He's trapped in this house and all these scary things are happening. And although it's really effective and I enjoyed it and I enjoyed being in the cinema, people screaming and all that, I was kind of a little bit disappointed because it was kind of like throwing the kitchen sink at the viewer, especially in terms of like horror cliches. Although they were good cliches and they did work, I still felt that I kind of missed the 1980s version. Even though there's things in this film which are far stronger than the 1980s version, the 1980s film, while it got some things wrong, really captured the isolation of Eelmarsh House and the slow burn nature of a ghost story and the mystery element, because the whole reveal of what's going on and why it's happening happens far too early in the film for my liking. It should be something that happens towards the end, and I don't think it can be a case of, oh well, everyone knows the story, because I think a lot of people, probably most people, don't know what The Women in Black is. So while it's famous amongst horror fans, I think a lot of people that would go to see it, they wouldn't know what's going on. So I think you could keep that element of mystery in the film. Criticisms aside, in those terms, I think that it does work. It is really enjoyable. It is quite gripping at times, and if you get the right atmosphere, which is often crucial for a horror film to be enjoyed in the cinema, it really, really can get you. The problem is that you don't walk away, at least I didn't walk away thinking about, there were no images, iconic moments that you get in films like The Changeling, you know, with the wheelchair. You don't have these moments that are really quite terrifying but stick in your head, because I prefer a film that chills as opposed to outright scares, because you see, it's kind of a cheap trick, because human beings naturally are built in a way that if you throw something up in their face quickly and have a loud noise along with it, 9 out of 10 people are going to jump. And it's a little bit too on the nose, I think, and it's a little bit it is a little bit, like I say, of a cheap trick. When it's done well, it really gets you and you kind of get exhilarated by it, but you do miss the psychological horror, and there aren't really many aspects of psychological horror in this film, which I found disappointing, because the story definitely has elements of psychological horror, like I say, with the remoteness, the loneliness, and the figure of a woman, the woman dressed in black. Well, that's not the name of the film, that's the Woman in Black, and some aspects as well, which I'm going to go into now, but which are the spoiler section of this video. But first of all, what I would like to say is it good? Yeah, it's a solid horror film, and I really enjoyed it for what it was. I missed the psychological horror elements of it, but I would definitely recommend seeing it, because it's good fun. It's a good fun horror film, and I think James Watkins did a good job directing it, and definitely go check it out. So now I'm going to go into the spoiler section. Just a couple of minutes of spoilers I want to talk about. So if you haven't read the book and you want to, or you haven't seen this film, then turn away. Don't turn away, turn over. I'm talking like I'm a TV channel. Switch it off. So, alright. The main thing in the film for me, the whole backstory where his wife dies, adding this element of tragedy, which we saw as well earlier in the year with The Awakening. That'll be my phone. I'm going to ignore that. So, Stuart, if you're watching, that was you. The Awakening did that. It had a backstory to it. It had this element to it that was trying to affect a link between the person's personal story and what's going on. And again, like I say, you don't need that, because the whole point of the film, the whole point of the story is that in the book, the main character has this family situation. I think his wife's maybe expecting, but he has this family situation. He's young, he's positive, and it's about how that is all taken away from him. and he is introduced to this really dark, horrible reality of this demonic thing that somehow was born out of anger and animosity towards the world. So that in itself is a scary thing, and you didn't need to add the backstory in because of it. So we go to the end of the film, which changed the entire ending of the film. The Arthur Kipps character dies. He dies trying to save his son. His son dies as well. And we have this strange thing where he's reunited with his wife, and the three of them walk off, and the woman in black's watching them. And it's almost as if the woman in black is letting them go. Maybe letting them go, or maybe she's looking and saying they're not getting away, because the whole idea, which is another change from the story, is that she is gathering souls. Basically, she's gathering the souls of children to do what she wants them to do. That's the perversion of it. It's an interesting idea because you've got children effectively killing themselves in the movie, which is an interesting idea, but again, it was unneeded. I think as well, I think there are obviously some CG things going on with Women in Black. Again, wasn't entirely needed. Certainly, one thing I do think the 1980s version got wrong was just having a woman with some pallid makeup on and seeing her up close too many times in the Women in Black, because the whole point of the original story is that she actually suffered from some sort of wasting disease. So when you see the Woman in Black, she's like, very, very gaunt and frightening because of that. And we don't really see that so much in the 1980s version, and we don't really see it so much in this version because you don't hear anything about that really. And they changed the whole story as well. They changed the whole idea of who the Woman in Black was, and then they tried to introduce this sort of the Ring like element where, or the old story, which is we have to go and get this body to consecrate ground. We have to make peace with the ghost. They brought that up, and again, it just felt like they were adding in too many Hollywood tropes. That was the big problem with it. And then you have the ending, which you could interpret that she lets them go because he's reintroduced the Woman in Black to her child. The thing that bugs me though is the fact that he's standing on a train platform and his son just walks off and gets down onto the track. He's holding his hand. I feel that was a cutting issue because I could have seen it. He goes to shake Sam's hand in the film, played brilliantly by Ciarán Hinds, and when he does that, that could have been the moment they walked away, but it wasn't really. They were holding hands, and you wouldn't really let go of your kid's hand on a railway platform. So, that all aside, again, go check it out. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's brilliant. I think it's good at what it is. I think it's missed the boat with regards to the story a little bit. There was really no reason to tinker with the story. I think it easily could have fleshed out to a full movie. And it's interesting how people always seem to want to put their own stamp on these things and change the story in some way or in some fashion. So, I'm sorry for being interrupted and I've went right off track and I've probably forgotten a million things that I wanted to say about the film, but that's The Woman in Black, directed by James Watkins, starring Daniel Radcliffe and Ciarán Hinds, written by Jane Goldman. Go and watch it, because one thing I will say is that it seems like this film is popular, so we may get more horror films like this, and I'm happy with that. That's absolutely fine, because it is well made, and well made horror films, unfortunately, are few and far between. But I would also say go check out the 1980s version and absolutely read the novella because it's fantastic. Bye for now. Follows a character called Arthur Kipps. It's set in the late 19th century or early, in fact not late 19th century, it's set in the early 20th century. And it's about a solicitor called Arthur Kipps, or a man who works for solicitors or lawyers, who is sent to a small coastal town in England, which is quite remote, to settle the estate of a Mrs. Drablow who has passed away. She lived in this house called Eelmarsh House, if you can get that right. And this house was on a small. I'll try and keep this as spoiler free as possible. First of all, I had a great set, and I went with my friends. My girlfriend came along as well, who hates horror films, but she's read the book, so she wanted to see this. Although I think she watched about 10% of it through her fingers. And there was a good crowd there, and it was a packed cinema, and people were screaming left, right, and centre, and just a really great Friday night atmosphere in the cinema. So that, I think, added to my impression of the film. I probably have a different impression of the film when I see it, uh, possibly on DVD. I might even go back to see it again in the cinema. So let's start off with what the film is about if you don't know. It follows a piece of land just off of the coast, connected by a causeway, which is a small road. And for anyone that's been on a causeway before, you'll know that at certain times the tide comes in and it covers the road so that you are isolated on that little island for a certain amount of time until the tide goes out. So this is the setting of the film. Arthur Kipps goes to this small town. When he's there, he realises that a lot of people don't want him settling the affairs of Miss Drablow, and he thinks it's perhaps a lot of superstition. I apologise for this farty chair again. Listen to that. Who many people will know as Jonathan Ross's wife, who's a popular television presenter in this country. But really, I mean, if you look at the film she's getting involved in, X-Men First Class, Stardust, etc., she is actually really carving out quite a successful career as a screenwriter herself. The film is also the return, or one in a number of movies, which marks the return of Hammer Horror, probably my favourite horror studio in film history. So there's a lot to really look forward to in this. Where do I begin? For any of you that have been following this channel since its beginning, from just over a year ago, you will know that I'm a huge fan of Susan Hill's The Women in Black. I love the original novella. I love the 1980s made-for-television Nigel Kneale adaptation. I love the play that was adapted from it quite famously as well. And I've been really looking forward to seeing the new adaptation, the new film version of The Women in Black, which has just been released here in Britain. It's directed by James Watkins. It stars Daniel Radcliffe and Ciarán Hinds, and it's written by Jane Goldman,